Virology, nutrition, long COVID, and Qigong. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. That was written by Wendell Berry. I felt despair after the last bout of COVID. When swimming or walking, I realised that my capacity was diminished. It wasn't clear if my breathing was less effective or if my muscles were still depleted. It was just a general sense of exhaustion that I'm really not used to experiencing. You may ask yourself, and with good reason, what on earth does Jeremy know about virology and nutrition? It's the usual story. Fools blunder in where angels fear to tread. My first clue came to me after a bioresonance test. The idea being that the machine can ping various energetic patterns through your body, almost like a submarine sending out a sonar ping. As the vibrations come back, they can suggest weaknesses in the body by their received responses. My therapist said, "You are low on zinc." Well, that was not a thing I'd ever considered. The parts of the puzzle fell into place. I remembered that my mother had been prescribed zinc pastilles when she had lost her sense of smell. Once one of my students then pointed out that the smell process requires zinc, but that the immune response also uses up a lot of zinc, hence the loss of smell as you fight the infection. I was chronically low in zinc, so started supplementing and my smell rushed straight back in. It made me wonder what other minerals had been depleted by the last bout of COVID, and more to that, why my immune hadn't withstood this onslaught better in the first place. The next place to look was my gut. I tested a sample and discovered that my gut biome is deficient in many of the required bacteria, meaning, amongst others, a depleted immune. Well, that's triggered a prebiotic supplementation regime and a change in diet to try to add diversity to my fibre intake. What part do all these minerals and vitamins actually play in the process? There are 4 major challenges to being a human: bacteria, toxins, parasites, and viruses. Well, bacteria, we've got a good grasp of. They're alive, they grow under the right conditions, they can be helpful or harmful to us, but in a daily regimen, a good daily regimen can keep us free of most bacterial challenges. Toxins are something that we learn about from childhood. Don't eat the mushrooms and the berries without somebody checking them for you. We all know the dangers of cyanide and arsenic and so forth. Parasites. Again, if we treat our food well and if we're careful about the quality of our water, we can usually surmount these. Viruses, however, are still rather an anathema. There are 2 principal types of virus. There's also 2 ways that we deal with them in our bodies. Many viruses are simple and unchanging, and that allows us to develop a vaccine to keep them at bay. We think of measles, polio, and the likes. Other viruses are notable because they are always changing, making them much more difficult to defend against. Our bodies have innate immunity, such as the skin or the mucous membrane linings in our airways and gut. If the virus can get past these first lines of defence, then we have the adaptive immune system, with specialised blood cells and proteins that target specific causes of infection. The latter system can learn and remember threats, allowing us immunity after successfully fighting off an infection. These responses, however, can be hampered by such things as our chosen nutrition, our stress levels, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, smoking, and alcohol. This understanding was very important for me. As an example, poor nutrition can negatively affect the microbiome, the gut barrier function, the inflammatory process, and the white blood cell function, all of which lead to compromised immunity. One of the primary villains in the piece is sugar, which was my personal bête noire. So, sugar is shown to increase levels of inflammatory proteins, including tumour necrosis alpha, TNF alpha, C-reactive protein, CRP, and interleukin 6, IL-6. They also interfere with the function of protective immune cells, including neutrophils and phagocytes. Not good. As the various habits started to fall away, well, I quit smoking about 15 years ago and alcohol about 3 years ago, there was always one treat left, and that was sugar. My therapist said, stop seeing sugar as a gift. Well, that was an eye-opener for me. When you see it for its true toxic self, it becomes easier to cut down. Surprisingly, giving up caffeine has really helped me cut my sugar right back without even noticing it. Back to the viruses then. There's a debate as to whether the viruses live or not. They need another cell to reproduce in, and they can't reproduce themselves. This is where the debate comes in. If you can't replicate yourself, then can you actually be considered alive? It seems that they can exist on surfaces for long periods of time, waiting to be picked up by another being. Well, does that make them a toxin? They use other people's cells to replicate. Does that make them a parasite? You see the issue. They can't be put in a box. Nota bene. Don't be putting viruses in boxes, please. There's a question also whether they were here before us, before single-celled amoeba, or maybe they came from another planet. At last, the true aliens. What is very noticeable is how successful they actually are. Witness our last pandemic. It's clear that to fight off these invaders, the body needs to be in tip-top shape. I quote again, immune support by micronutrients is historically based on vitamin C deficiency and supplementation in scurvy in early times. It has since been established that the complex, integrated immune system needs specific micronutrients including vitamin A, D, C, E, B6, B12, folate, zinc, iron, copper and selenium, which play vital, often synergistic roles at every stage of the immune response. Well, the next question is, where do we get these nutrients from? Our farmers regularly add only 4 or 5 nutrients to their soil to grow our crops. But the human body requires a dozen or more different nutrients as a minimum. This is why the Mediterranean diet is often highlighted as a perfect diet. And I quote again, the Mediterranean diet puts a higher focus on plant foods than many other diets. It's not uncommon for vegetables, whole grains and legumes to make up all or most of a meal. People following this diet typically cook these few foods using healthful fats such as olive oil and add plenty of flavourful spices. Meals may include small portions of fish, meat and also eggs. In short, the Mediterranean diet is rich and varied and would provide all the micronutrients a body would need to fight off an infection, but also to help rebuild after an infection. The diet's also rich in collagen, and that supports the gut lining, and hence immunity also. When we take in toxins, they become coated with mucus and can easily be disposed of or stored. The storage process is part of getting fat. Your poor body tries to isolate all these toxins we love so much from the last donut, pastry, processed meat, or sugary sweet. Whilst it tries to save you, you become obese. The picture starts to come into focus. Bad diets, bad habits, weakened immune, susceptibility to viral attacks. It's an economic picture too. Stroll through the discount supermarkets and see how many products contain sugar and salt and fat. The craze for salted caramel in such things as chocolate and ice cream is no mistake. The food giants have scientists who build these foods to be addictive. This is the perfect combination of fat, sugar and salt that triggers all the reward centres in one's brain, making one want more and more. One branch of science is destroying your immune system for profit, whilst another branch is offering you a shortcut to immunity for profit. We saw in the past pandemic how deeply the poorer members of our community suffered. And I think we'll also see these figures reflect the more stressed members of our community also in due course. As humans, we're always looking for the easy road and the shortcut. We were coerced into taking an experimental vaccine, essentially to stop our beloved NHS from falling over. An NHS that has, in one sense, been so deeply cut, but also become managerially bloated that it's no longer fit for purpose. All of this to stop an embarrassment for our government here in the UK. Well, time will tell if simple precautions that countries like Sweden took, masks and no lockdown, were better in the long run. I agree. Why not protect the aged and the vulnerable? Perhaps our government realised that their policies of having children rely on takeaways, stopping cooking lessons in school, selling off playing fields so nobody exercises anymore, and having everybody rely on refined sugar for their energy would quickly come to roost during the pandemic, and that we'd burn our country down when we saw the bodies piling up in the corridors of the hospitals, and finally realise who the culprits and the robbers really are. Well, in Qigong, we rely upon the power of our consciousness. We believe that anything can be healed if you create the right state of mind. Science is now following this trend. Here, I quote from an article from Johns Hopkins Medical School. What is clear, however, is that there is definitely a strong link between positivity and health. Additional studies have found that positive attitudes improve outcomes and life satisfaction across a spectrum of conditions, including traumatic brain injuries, strokes, and brain tumours. Studies also find that negative emotions can weaken the immune response. So I quote here from an interview with Dr. Pang Ming, the founder of Zheneng style Qigong. We cultivate our own qi through accessing nature's great store of qi. This approach produces quicker results than the other styles of Qigong that focus on building one's own internal energy first. But cultivating qi is not the most fundamental. Cultivating one's spirit is. Mastery of qi is not the most fundamental. Cultivating one's spirit is. Mastery of qi is really achieved through mastery of consciousness. We use consciousness in a careful, craftsman's-like way to shape our lives, to attain our goals. If we use the modern terminology to name this process, we call it Qigong. The ancients used the word qi, but this mystified people. In modern times, Qigong is just the refinement of consciousness to enhance the state of energy in the body. This leads to vibrant health, a harmonizing body and mind, and an awakening of spiritual life. When we practice, we use the exercises of Qigong to open and stretch and strengthen the body. We use the meditative guided visualizations to bring the mind to bear on fixing the problems. It's a very powerful two-pronged approach. It's Dr. Pang's opinion that when something like COVID strikes one, then one should sit quietly and see the process through, just practicing all the time. He says, fill yourself with good qi and there'll be no room for bad qi. Well, in reality, he says there's no such thing as good or bad qi, but just qi that is currently not seen as helpful by your system. And don't forget that awful phrase, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. There's an embedded truth there, although allow the virus to do its thing. If your practice is strong, it'll pass, leaving you better off. There's a great healing to be had from the clean out of colds and flu. It's good to push your immune from time to time and come out stronger. The positive mindset and the strong, healthy body are by far the best defense against viral attacks. The second line is to see that we are what we eat. If we make the body as healthy and as clean as we can, that supports all we're trying to do with our Qigong. Lastly, realizing that sometimes we just have to stop and take time off to allow our bodies to replenish and update. It's important to realize that stress will kill you, just slowly. Value your body. Value your life. We only have this brief opportunity. Use it wisely and use it well.